L, or 11, or whatever else you call her. She is one of, if not perhaps the number one protagonist in Netflix's major series, Stranger Things. Now, I've already made a video on Stranger Things regarding the Mind Flayer. However, in that I did promise that I would try and go over Elle and her abilities. Now, if you haven't seen that, I do recommend it. But if you're just here to see Elle, then I'll go right ahead. Now, Elle, as we see in Stranger Things, has abilities to bend things around with her very mind. Now, some people call this telepathy or so on. Actually, I think telepathy is being able to hear other people's thoughts, but whatever. She has these amazing powers, and if you clicked on this video, you're wondering how is she able to do this? Well, I'll start going into this, but there are of course spoilers, but you should have seen that coming. Elle, as we see later on, in the series, her mother was a volunteer, or at least in some way, assisting in a government organization that was obviously trying to delve into better understandings of dimensions. Now, I've already gone over an explanation of dimensions in the Mind Flayer video. If you've already heard it, you could just skip ahead a little bit, but for those of you that haven't, I'll just give a quick wrap-up of it. Say our entire universe is a book. Now, if you open that book up to a random page and put your finger on it, you could pretend that page is our dimension out of many, probably infinite, because unlike that book, our universe could have like millions, billions, or maybe even infinite other dimensions, different shades of reality. Now, if you were to take a pencil, so to say, or pen, and then poke a hole into that very page, and then that say is our dimension, and then you flip the page over, that hole is on that other page, which as such has allowed things like the Demogorgon, the Mind Flayer, and so on to cross through, as I explained before in the other video. But now we're going, and there are tons of other dimensions, and it takes great and possibly infinite amount of energy to pop a hole through to other dimensions. But things can cross back and forth if we do that. If that were to happen, Now, in the series, we see that Elle's mother was with this government organization, and they were experimenting with things regarding dimensions and our very reality. And she was doing some kind of experiment where she was put in a tube and quite possibly was being subjugated to go to try and fade between the realities of our dimension, or try to go to another dimension. Either way, this regarded fading between our reality, and going between, in a sense, dimensions, kind of like the halfway point. Now, in it we see that, however, Elle's mother was currently pregnant with Elle, unbeknownst to her. She didn't know that she currently was carrying Elle. However, in it we see that this happens, and it's possible that while they were being deep fried practically between our shades of reality, the Elle, who was practically still forming her very mind and so on, possibly was forced to adapt her own mind was forced to possibly adapt to to this new environment around her, possibly growing a connection or better understanding, perhaps, like instinct understanding between our dimensions, like practically in the halfway point, evolving in a sense, like, or just trying to adapt to this new environment. Now, of course, when I say this, I don't mean that Elle's mother gained these powers exactly, but it's quite possible, as seen later in the series that I'll delve into later. But because Elle's brain was practically still forming and was it was easier for her to adapt to this. But Elle's mother, a practically fully developed brain, didn't really, develop the same sense as Elle. Now, when this experiment ended, and then she realized she was pregnant with Elle, the government organization, that's just what I call them, I don't remember their real name or anything, they realized this, and they wanted to try and do an experiment because they knew that Elle, or at least Elle's mother's new child, could have potential to be a new weapon. Now, humanity, of course, as you know, bends its environment around us in order to help better suit our needs. In fact, animals do this. A beaver building a dam to better make a home, a deer, bending, pulling down a sapling in order to eat up the leaves or something. Living things can tend to bend their environment around to better suit their needs or better chances of survival. Now, this government organization wanted to learn more about dimensions in order to create a better weapon, in order to stand against, as you know, the growing conflict that was the Civil War. I mean, no, not the Civil War. What's wrong with me? I'm sorry. I meant the Cold War between the great US of A and back in the time when the great US of A and the USSR were both trying to say to each other, hey, do you want to blow up, pal? And they were both trying to stock up on their best weaponry. In this time, that's where this whole series boils into. Elle, as we see in the later series, was abducted by the government organization, and they made a medical report that Elle died in being born, practically. However, Elle's mother didn't believe this at all. One, because she claimed she saw Elle, even though she was probably highly subjugated with, morphine and so on. She claims that she saw Elle, which we see in the series. It's likely she did, but I don't really understand it fully, but it's possible that her mother might actually be connected between dimensions as well. Now, you could just say, oh, she knew it because it was motherly instinct, but that's not what I'm basing this on. Elle's mother was with her between dimensions, and it's possible they grew a closer bond of some kind between there when they were both subsidized in there. Elle's mother, of course, goes looking for Elle and ends up finding her, but only briefly before the government decides to practically melt her brain so that way they can cover up their tracks and say that she just came down with a mental illness. Now, of course, we see later on, Elle does find her mother and somehow is actually able to tap into her mother's very memories. Now, we don't see this in other series. Sure, Elle is able to, see other people by with her powers and so on, but she's actually able to directly connect with her mother and her memories. Now, Elle's mother gives her a whole background about everything that is, as well as the people watching the show. Elle herself is possibly able to use these powers by bending the dimensions around us. She has an instinct, or deep psychological understanding of dimensions, where she's actually able to use her mind in order to bend it around us. Now, of course, this comes at her toll with her brain. As we see in the series, she gains a nosebleed usually whenever she uses these powers. This is because she's practically using like a pretty much like a backdoor control room in her brain that really humans aren't really supposed to have there, or so on. And so it's this little device area is kind of alien to the natural human brain, and it's possible this could be deadly for Elle. She might suffer a mental illness herself, for all we know, or possibly in the future. We see that whenever she uses her powers, she gets a nosebleed, like I said, and that might lead to brain damage because the human mind isn't developed to understand dimensions and so on, like not with a deep understanding that Elle obviously has. She's able to bend the environment around her in order to interact with our own dimension, and quite possibly maybe even with other dimensions. Now, that's why the government guys try to train her. They practically train her mind to use her as a weapon. We see this in the beginning of the series. She's being held in a government facility and is being trained to do different things. Now, of course, we see as well at the end of the series, at the end of season 2, she is able to close the portal between the Veil of Shadows and our dimension. She's quite possibly able to do this, like I said, because of her understanding of dimensions. But this could be deadly to her, like I explained. And she could possibly be a massive danger. But she could also be one of humanity's final hopes. And the government guys weren't that far off. I mean, the government organization. They weren't that far off. If people are able to bend dimensions around them, practically using their minds as weapons, the Mind Flayer wouldn't stand that much of a chance, because people would just be able to bend him into a monstrous form. Not that he isn't already, but still, you get the point that I mean. Elle is an extremely useful human being. The government sees her as a tool or weapon. Her friends see her as a valuable ally, and as well as others around her. But she herself is not quite her abilities might not only be a danger to her brain, but possibly to people around her. I mean, imagine if she had like a stroke with her brain and she literally just wreaks havoc to everything around her. It's pretty scary stuff either way. But if harnessed right, it could be a useful ability. Now, that's my background on what quite possibly could be Elle's powers. If you like stuff like this, probably see my How Does the Mind Flayer Work video. I delve into how dimensions work better there, I believe. Thank you. Oh, and a like and subscribe would go a long way. Bye.